Um, yes, it's on. Okay. Good morning to everyone for this first plenary talk. It's a pleasure to me to introduce you to Professor Jutta Harms, who is a director at the Leibniz Institute for Science and Mathematics Education and a full professor for biology education at the University of Kiel in Germany since 2007. She owns a PhD in cell biology and has worked as a high school teacher for several years. From 2000 to 2007, she held chairs of biology education at the University of Munich and Bremen. And today is going to contribute to the topic of challenges and opportunities to improve the scientific literacy on evolution through formal or informal education. So thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Good morning to Barcelona and out there, wherever you are. I'm just trying to share my screen, but I'm told that the host has deactivated sharing screen for me. Could you please fix that? Hello? Is there anybody out there?
You can listen us?
Yes, now
okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think that, okay. You now are sharing your screen, perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction of my person. And as you can see here on the first screen, the title of my presentation, as the nice lady just already told you, is still under construction: how to develop scientific literacy on evolution over time. And at the beginning, I'm very sorry, but I have to tell you something disappointing, probably, because I'm not going to answer this question. And I think this will probably be one of the central questions we will discuss in the roundtable slot later, and perhaps also in the discussion about my presentation. I was asked with my talk to contribute to the topic challenges and opportunities to improve the scientific literacy on evolution through formal or informal education. And what I will do is, I'm coming from a research institute that is doing empirical research on the learning of the sciences. And I, in my work, am focusing on formal education. And this is why I will stress this aspect in my talk. When we are talking about scientific literacy on evolution in formal education, what comes up to your mind and to my mind? And I think the keywords I put on the right-hand side, like dinosaurs, Charles Darwin, Homo sapiens, the evolution of mankind, is very prominent. But the question is, if we are talking about scientific literacy on evolution, isn't there more, like topics as very currently important pandemics, zoonosis, or also the biodiversity crisis that is very close to climate change, the climate change crisis also. What am I going to talk about in the next, let's say, about 40 minutes? I structured my presentation in 3 slots. Like, the first one is giving a definition about scientific literacy, and in linkage to that, scientific literacy on evolution. Then, and this will be the biggest part of my talk, I would like to take you on a journey showing you 3 local spots in my work. And this is 3 projects that are currently conducted in my department together with many nice colleagues all over the world, Evovis, EvoPrime, and two projects that are coupled, ProSim and FISC. And at the end, I want to give a conclusion, perspectives, and I have 3 questions at the end that perhaps will bring us to discussion. And I hope, even though we are communicating mostly online in this year, I hope that we will get into a nice, fruitful discussion for all of us. Let me start. Scientific literacy and scientific literacy on evolution. When we are hearing the word scientific literacy, I think most of us will think about the of the framework that the PISA study in 2000 was using. And scientific literacy, here I put the definition of the OECD from 2009. Scientific literacy embraces individual scientific knowledge and also the competency to use that knowledge for different reasons, or for doing different things like identifying questions, acquire new knowledge, explain scientific phenomena, and so on. And in the long run after that, other colleagues refined this definition, and I am very interested in working on the framework of Roberts and Bybee, that both of them developed, where they differentiated a little bit more 2 visions of scientific literacy. The first is that students develop understandings of content and competencies deemed important by the scientific discipline, without regard for how those ideas and practices may or may not be significant in other contexts. The second vision of scientific literacy, Roberts and colleagues formulated, is going beyond this first vision. For he and they stress that scientific literacy also comprises student engagement with science ideas and practices that are embedded in the context of societal issues related to and or impacted by scientific phenomena. If you think back to the first keywords I put on my second slide, you can see that the ones like Charles Darwin, dinosaurs, Homo sapiens, that are traditionally talked about in the biology classroom are more related to the first vision. The second vision, there comes in keywords like pandemic, zoonosis, biodiversity crisis. And in my view, and this is one point we should perhaps discuss in the roundtable discussion, and I'm sure that at least Kostas will be very interested in this, Robert's vision 2 of scientific literacy is the one that I think, in my view, is the one that we have to focus on in biology teaching. However, what do we know so far about evolution learning, about evolution teaching? I'm sure there are many experts in the audience, and so I will not go into this for too long, but just shortly some summary about the state of the art. We all know that students and teachers and also other groups in the public have unscientific conceptions about evolution. I think the pandemic right now has shown this in most of our countries. Many persons resist to accept the theory of evolution as the best scientific explanation, also a problem nowadays regarding vaccination, for example. If we are looking into the literature, we find hundreds of research studies about conceptions about different evolutionary concepts, different evolutionary principles or key concepts. I just put here some by chance, more or less, that are well known mostly in the community. And besides elaborating all these conceptions, many categories of conceptions were installed, like anthropomorphic, teleologic, finalistic, and so on. But so far, from an empirical point of view of science education research, we do not have so much sound findings how we can support and help students of different ages to understand evolution and in the long run develop evolutionary scientific literacy. So we find in the literature many more theoretical considerations, also first attempts to show in more or less mostly qualitative studies what has an impact, which teaching measures. And here you find a collection of work also about out of school settings, what they achieve concerning developing scientific understanding of evolution. This was more or less the introduction. Let me now go with you into these projects. I already announced that I want to go deeper with you and show you what we are doing. Developing scientific literacy on evolution over the lifespan. I think this is more or less what we need to think about, even though when I'm talking now so far about the focal point of my work that is about formal education, even though learning evolution, understanding evolution, applying the evolutionary concept, and I know that there is a mixture of usage of the word evolution. It's evolution. Is it evolution or is it evolution theory what we are talking about? I think when we are describing, when the human mind is describing scientifically what evolution is, then it's more the evolution theory concept. But if we are talking about what happened during the development of biological systems, we are talking about evolution. This is my discrimination of the two terms. I'm putting the word scientific literacy, but being honest, the focus of our work so far is more the cognitive part of scientific literacy. So how to help students, school students, as well as university students in higher education to understand evolution. And here I have put my studies I want to talk about, and I ordered them to the different sections of the educational career of the different persons. Like I will start here with the first project, the Evoke project that was taking place in upper secondary, on upper secondary level, and also with students of teacher education at universities. Then I want to go into another project called ProSim that we couple to the project FISC. And in these projects, we are working with digital technologies that we use to help prospective teachers to get an idea how to teach evolution to their school students. And if I still have time, I would really very much like to introduce to you this project, Evoke, where we are looking at the question how to teach evolution to very young children between elementary and primary level. So one basic hypothesis of Lena Tibel's and my work about evolution is that we assume that the biological principles of evolution that I have put here on the y-axis, selection, inheritance, and variation, that are differentiated by different key concepts. You know these from the literature. This is more or less the surface of understanding. But beneath this surface, we find other more abstract and general concepts that trigger or don't trigger the understanding of these biological concepts. Lena and I have elaborated on this in our theoretical paper that we published in 2017 in Science and Education. And in my talk now, I will focus on the threshold concepts, randomness and probability. And Lena focused more on spatial scale and temporal scale questions. This you find in this reference I put here. So we are what I'm going to introduce to you in our project now is the focus randomness and probability as threshold concepts for the understanding and acceptance of evolution. And this work we did in joint collaboration with my two colleagues from Stony Brook University in New York, Rosname and Gina Speclia, and of course, very, very prominent in this project, my postdoc Daniela Fiedler. So, basics for the understanding of my study. Evolution is considered a key objective in science curricula. This is internationally more or less the case. Students and teachers often have inadequate conceptions about evolution. I already talked about this. And we find many people that resist to accept the theory of evolution as the best scientific explanation. Looking into empirical research, we find positive relationships between the evolution understanding and acceptance, but these results are very mixed. Other studies show weak to no relationships between understanding and acceptance. And other influencing factors could be elaborated, like religion, thinking disposition, or feeling of certainty, what is related very closely to an understanding of the nature of science. And also, some work has been started that is examining the role of statistical reasoning in learning evolution at the beginning. This research is at the beginning, and this is what I'm meaning when I'm talking about the concepts probability and randomness. In our Evoke study, we had two questions. What is the relationship between randomness and probability, knowledge, evolution, understanding, and acceptance? And does randomness and probability knowledge serve as predictor for evolutionary understanding and acceptance? We were interested in this because if we can find out that these concepts, these, as we call them, randomness and probability threshold concepts, serve as a predictor, then we have some triggers that we know of that we can use to promote evolutionary understanding and acceptance. We had a sample of 538 undergraduate students from introductory biology courses in the northeastern United States. And the course content was aligned with the 5 core concepts of biology literacy, according to the AAAS paper. And evolution is here a major and constant theme, so a sustainable theme going through the course. And randomness and probability as threshold concepts were only discussed briefly here. The design was that we did an online diagnostic test at the beginning and at the end of the course, so it was a pre-post study, to to catch the levels of evolutionary knowledge. Here we used tests that are validated by many colleagues all over the world, and also another test that measured the levels of acceptance of evolution. Near the end of the course, we measured the levels of randomness and probability knowledge in the context of evolution. For this purpose, we had developed in a study before 2 tests, the PRA-PRO-EVO, that is measuring randomness and probability in evolutionary context, and secondly, another test that measures randomness and probability in mathematical contexts. We did, for finding our results, we did correlation analysis to determine the relationships among the instruments, and a stepwise multiple regression analysis to examine if randomness and probability predicts evolution understanding and acceptance of evolution. As you remember, this was our main question. I don't want to bother you with all the detailed findings, so I just put here a chart with some data, but I think for our purpose, we don't have to go into detail. Also, this is already published in the JAST journal. So let me come to the summary and to the discussion of this study. Randomness and probability knowledge is related to understanding as well as to acceptance. That is what we found with our sample. It serves as a predictor for understanding and acceptance. So this might be trigger instruments to promote evolution understanding in the classroom and beyond. And randomness and probability knowledge explain the variance of acceptance. Of course, there are limitations of the study. The data are from a single sample, and at one time point at one time point, all the data were assessed, and we had no data. We had no pre-test about students' randomness and probability knowledge at the beginning of the course. Perhaps there can be some interference of this as well. Anyhow, our study gave new insight into the relationship of understanding and acceptance of evolution, or better, perhaps it contributed to a further clarification of these relationships, and it showed that improving randomness and probability knowledge could be a valuable addition to evolution instruction in the classroom. Let me now come to the second study, where we are using a digital tool to in teacher education to support prospective teachers, biology teachers, to teach evolution. When we are talking about the education of prospective teachers, then we have this model as in the background that is describing the learning track of biology teachers as in this more complex interrelationships. The prospective teachers have opportunities to learn at the school days, at university, during traineeship, and also during their career. And they bring with them personal requirements like their individual cognitive abilities, their personality, their motivation to learn, to become a teacher. And also, of course, we have in the background the educational system that is the framework for the whole education of the future teachers. And all these factors, the opportunities to learn, the context, the personal requirements, lead to how the future teacher will teach evolution in the biology classroom. And this again will have impact on the outcomes of the students, like knowledge about evolution, like acceptance and so on, but also on this teacher, him or herself, like his health, but also the experience that he is making in teaching will have effects on further teaching activities that he or she will show. So this is the framework of our research of biology teacher to become teachers that teach evolution successfully to their school students. We know about the obstacles in learning evolution. I talked about that. And now what we were thinking is that perhaps this new digital technology and integrating artificial intelligence will make it possible to track individual teacher students learning, but also on the long run, or school students learning, and provide targeted support that is tailored to the individual needs of each teacher student to overcome these obstacles. So digital technologies and artificial intelligence will help us to develop adaptive tools to support prospective teachers
Do you listen us?
action. Yeah.
Sorry,
Allow.
can you listen
Sorry?
us? Because we didn't listen. Ah, okay, we listen you again. We lost you for 1 second.
Okay, I'm back.
Yes, you're back.
Thank you.
We can
Thank
listen
you. Thank you.
No,
Sorry.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Automated analysis of these interaction allows us for a just-in-time assessment of the student's individual performance and to give adequate feedback at the moment. So this complex target we are trying to follow in our PROSIM and in our FISC study. In the PROSIM study, we developed a simulated classroom simulation about evolution. And in a second step now, we will add to this classroom simulation a chatbot that is giving an adaptive chatbot who is giving adaptive feedback to the particular student. Very short, when we are talking about the knowledge of teachers, professional knowledge of teachers, we differentiate between the content knowledge, this is in our case, the evolution knowledge, the facts, the terms, the concepts, the principles. But also we are talking, of course, about the pedagogical content knowledge, like knowing about misconceptions, knowing about instructional strategies, and we have generic knowledge. I don't want to go into this because this is not our topic today. Also, we have another differentiation. So we have declarative knowledge, that is to know what. That means the facts, the terms, the concepts about evolution. But this declarative knowledge that is learned in university must be transformed into procedural knowledge in the classroom, in the teaching situation, so that this declarative knowledge can help to teach, like action-related knowledge, knowledge in action. These are the terms you find in the literature. The aim of our PROSIM project was the development of a digital learning environment to assess procedural knowledge, so the knowledge in action about evolution, and to create a learning environment that we can use for higher education of evolution biology teachers. In this classroom, the user, in our case, the teacher student, takes over the role of the teacher and can choose and pose questions about evolutionary phenomena to a virtual class. The individual virtual
Can you listen us?
Mathematics, and this, in my view, it was very basic mathematics, in my view, is much more easier than a classroom where we wanted to integrate evolutionary concepts, knowledge of students about evolution. But we did, and what we have done in our work was we integrated 27 questions and corresponding student answers, n equals 476, on the evolutionary process of natural selection for different domains. You see here we have questions asking for bacteria, plants, animals, humans, so the different
I think that we are having some problems with the internet connection. Can you hear us? Because we lost you again.
I'm sorry.
Okay, now we are listening to you again. We lost you for a second again, but I think that we are having some internet. Turn the camera? Okay, maybe you can turn your camera, or I don't know how to fix. Yes.
So I go on and I leave out my camera.
Okay, better. Thank you for this. Yeah, you can continue. Thank you. The microphone, you have on your microphone, because we cannot listen you. You're muted, or? Okay, we're having some technical problems, sorry.
Classroom to support the young prospective teacher students to be able to diagnose the conceptions that the simulated students bring with them into the classroom. And as you can see here, we have different categories like zoology, botanic, human beings, mankind, and bacteria. And then we have different topic fields like the whale shrimps, the gecko, a mouse, the kiwi, and so on. And on the right-hand side here, you see the question that the student can ask to this, that the teacher student can ask to the students. I put here one as an example. I don't know, perhaps later you can have my charts. I don't know whether this is planned. Then you can go into this into more detail if you want to. So, and then we get the student Hannah here is choosing a question, and then she gets the answer of a simulated school student. Like here, the crabs learn to live with other sensory organs, which reduces the eyes. And then the student has to categorize which kind of misconceptions this is, like teleologic, anthropomorphic, and so on, or whether it's scientifically correct. So I will shorten this up because I get here some information from the host, therefore I'm a little, I'm not so focused, I'm sorry. And at the end, we as the researchers get many informations about how the particular teacher student behaved in the classroom. And of course, you can say what you just showed, you can do with paper pencil. But the reason what helps, or the point how the simulation helps us, is that we get a lot data, because the student is working with many students' questions and answers. And so we get a big data pool. What we did a validation, of course, of the classroom with another instrument, and we were successful as far as the validation data showed us that we can use this digital environment for learning, training of diagnostic knowledge about evolutionary misconceptions, and also for the assessment of procedural CK and PCK about evolution. So now, very shortly, the next step, FISC, the FISC project, where we combine this simulated classroom with an adaptive feedback bot. We have informations from other contexts and other studies that learning with digital technologies, with simulation, can help, especially when you are learning abstract concepts like the threshold concepts, randomness, and probability, for example. So we decided to develop feedback bots for our simulated classroom that helps the teacher student to do the right thing, to react correctly is the wrong word, but to react in a way in the classroom so that fruitful learning progressions can occur. Bots are conversational interfaces, also in short called chatbots. It's a software tool that interacts with the user in a teaching learning context in a more or less natural and dialogue-oriented way. And we hope to support the students in our classroom with these tools. I'm hurrying a little bit because of the interruptions. I'm a little bit short of time now, I'm sorry. We have evidence that in other contexts, using such intelligent tutoring systems leads to better learning. And so we are now developing with artificial intelligent methods the chatbot using a pool of questions and answers that we have from colleagues in our own work to feed the chatbot. And this is technologically not so easy, but we have colleagues from the informatics department at the University of Furtwangen who are supporting us in this. And also we, in our theoretical underpinnings, we are drawing back to the feedback model from Hattie that differentiated the feedback in 3 parts: where am I going, how am I going, and where to next. So this is our concept for, or our framework for the feedback that we are developing about evolution for the students. Here we have a work in progress model about how to, which step in diagnosis the student will have to go through. And this is the background model, or one of the background models that we use for developing the feedback bots. So the aim is, and I think I don't have to repeat this, to, at the long run, have a tool that we can use in higher education to help our prospective biology teachers to be able to diagnose their students' non-scientifically correct understandings of evolution, of natural selection, of variation, of inheritance, and also to support them in giving a fruitful feedback so that the virtual student can do the next step. I very shortly come to the third study. It's about elementary children, and what we aim to do here, not because in all our studies in later ages, we saw so many problems, and we are sure, and psychological research shows this, and also science education research has shown this again and again, that the problem mostly is at the beginning. And so we are asking ourselves, how can we initiate first understanding in young children? Because young children can understand a lot, but obviously we are putting them in very early ages on a wrong trap. They show robust, scientifically wrong conceptions when they are older. We know that children try to explain their world, and they want to predict what will happen. And they construct patterns of explanation of the basis of their own experiences. And in our world, that is mostly cause and effect. Evolution on elementary level, we have some studies, not much, but not many, but some. Starting with evolution on elementary level supports scientific patterns of thinking and counteracts the establishment of scientifically wrong ideas. Especially Kellerman has done a lot of studies about this. Studies have also shown that the young children are capable of grasping first aspects of evolution. And in our own work, in a literature review, we saw that in children books, research about learning evolution on the elementary level and about successful intervention so far is scarce. And therefore, we want to find ways to initiate first scientifically correct understanding of evolutionary principles in the younger ages, and especially about variation, inheritance, and selections. So therefore, we have this study design. In the first study, we did the qualitative analysis of children books. And if you give me some more minutes, I would really love to give you some results of this study. And the study 2 and A and B, we are just starting. Here we want to use the conclusion of our qualitative analysis of children books for the promotion of elementary levels children about evolutionary principles. Children books often do not meet scientific requirements. Here first we see from 2000 to today, more or less, the children books about evolution that we found for our analysis. And you see that there are many books for younger children, 0 to 6 years. 0 is of course around 6 years, and older children books, here the dark blue column. The research questions that we asked to these books was, how is evolution presented and explained here? Which examples are used, like which organisms, which evolutionary contents? Also, are evolutionary principles presented, like variation, inheritance, selections? And are they touching in any way threshold concepts, like spatial scale, time scales, randomness, probability? And do children books transfer unscientific understanding, perhaps teleological, anthropomorphic, and so on? And how is the language used? Because of course, the transfer medium to give informations in these books is language, written language. So we looked at the nouns and the verbs that are used. We did a qualitative content analysis and had a category system to do this, where we had 3 categories: contents, organisms, evolutionary principles, and threshold concepts and misconceptions. And we did a computer-assisted content analysis to look further to the scientific terms that are used and the verbs describing evolution in the books. And I will not in detail go into the graphs now because we are run out of time. What we found is that these books, 31 books, in English language we had more, and also German books that we analyzed, more English books than German ones. Hardly plants were used as organisms. And of course, focusing on zoology gives problems in the understanding of plants. And we all know about plant blindness, so in our view, this is already one problem that we found here, and also that plants are evolving as well as animals. Often evolution is focusing on phylogeny in these books. Children books mainly focus on selection, and this is the point that we are sticking to in our further research, on selection as well as on huge spatial and temporal scales. To understand macroevolutionary processes, knowledge about variation, inheritance, selection, huge spaces is necessary. Colleagues show that selection offers a challenge for young children, so it's very problematic to understand. And when selection is talked about before variation, Emmons and Kellerman showed that this can lead to severe misconceptions. So we have some more results that show that also we have a mixture of using nouns and verbs in an everyday understanding and mixing this with biological understandings of the world, like to fill, evolution is used without being explained, and Darwin developed his theory of evolution, but also Neanderthals and Homo sapiens developed large brains. We have 2 different connotations of the word develop in such books that are not explained and not, and in our view, there is a huge question mark what is happening in the brains of the young children when they are using and reading, or parents are reading these books to the children. So let me come to an end. What I tried to show you in these 3 studies that are located at different time spots in the educational career of students that are learning evolution or are learning to teach evolution. I put 3 statements for each study. 1 statement in Evoke, we showed that an understanding of threshold concepts shows positive effects on students' understanding of evolutionary principles and also on acceptance. The classroom simulation could foster prospective biology teachers' capability to identify scientifically incorrect evolutionary knowledge. This we will broaden by the chat feedback bot that we are installing. And the last study with elementary children, that I think the main point of our analysis was that variation is a lacking evolutionary principle in these books. My questions that I wanted to put, and perhaps we can go into this in the roundtable discussions, are the three you see here. Is it possible to develop scientific literacy and evolution without a solid ground of knowledge and understanding of the theory of life? Because we know that there is a big lack of such understanding. And can we talk about evolutionary scientific literacy on evolution before we clarified these questions? And what knowledge is needed? What if we say, okay, perhaps we don't have to have a so profound and wide understanding of evolution for developing scientific literacy on evolution? Which knowledge is needed? And touching the interdisciplinary aspect, what knowledge and competencies come in from other school subjects, for example. So here I want at the end to show you the collaborations and third-party funding. I'm thankful to my two postdocs, Daniela Fiedler and Julian Fischer, and my doctoral students, Isabel Adler, who work together with me in these studies, and also these nice friends and colleagues from Sweden, Lena Tibell with her group, Ross Nehm with his colleagues, Jens Möller from University of Kiel with his postdoc Niels Martz, and my colleagues from the University of Furtwangen. Thank you for your patience, and I'm sorry that it took me longer than thought, and I hope that you found some interesting information during my presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I think that we have just very quick time for one question because we are out of time. So someone want to ask something very quickly? No, I'm just have a very quick question for you to finish this session. It's about which is your opinion, also according to your huge experience to teaching in the high schools and also the university, about how to explain to the students about the concepts of the evolutions, because well, we were discussing this yesterday, but these concepts are very complex sometimes. And for example, for me, I found when I started to teach this at the university that the students didn't have many knowledge about the evolution, and maybe it could be interesting use so real examples or social examples to explain these very complex evolutionary concepts. Thank you.
Yes, I think as a starting point, it's always necessary to try to find out their misunderstandings. I think this is the first point. And another point is that I think it's difficult to put up the slides again. So perhaps you remember the table with the different aspects that we integrated in our classroom simulations. We have the kingdoms, we have the gain or loss, and we have morphological traits, and we have physiological traits. And in my view, it's very, and research shows this, that it's very important to use all of these combinations, not only to teach the basic principles of evolution using only examples of zoology, because we know that perhaps if very natural selection is understood in zoology, it doesn't say at all that it's also understood in the contexts with plants or with bacteria, and even worse with the evolution of human beings, because there, of course, we have more the problem of the acceptance and conflicts with other understandings outside science. So I think this is very important to try out different contexts and also different qualitatives of evolutionary concepts like loss and gain of a particular trait. This is also very important. I hope I could.
Thank you very much for this, again, very interesting organization. So we have now a very few minutes for the coffee break. Please try to come here again on time for the next session. I would think that we have like 10 minutes more or less for the coffee break. Thank you very much again, Yuti, for your cool intervention.
Thank you.
Ute, sorry for, well, the technical problems that we have.
Yeah, that's not your fault. I'm sorry for being so long.
It was with the internet connection, so well, sorry, I'm
yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we'll begin. Yep. Okay, welcome to the plenary roundtable. This session is on challenges and opportunities in scientific literacy in formal and informal education. And so that's a really exciting topic. It's very broad, but we have an incredible panel of diverse and expert views that we can bring to the table to think about how can we cultivate scientific literacy in the evolution education space. And so what we'll do today, we'll start with just a round of introduction to our panel members. If the IT people can help get Ute Harms, if she's going to join us on Zoom. Hello, Ute. What we'll do is we'll begin with a brief round of introductions. I'll let the panel members introduce themselves. And then we'll do 2 rounds of short answer questions where we encourage audience questions to follow up. And then we'll have a more open and longer form discussion on any of the issues that might arise. So I guess we can just go, let's just imagine that Ute is sitting in the middle here. So we can just go down the line. And so maybe we can begin with you, Sylvia.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I suppose, in short, I have to say I'm a teacher. Okay, I'm here. I'm just a teacher. I was years ago a scientist, but I've been a secondary teacher for the last decades. And currently, I'm already teaching in the pre-service Teacher's Master in the University Polytechnical of Catalonia, okay? I have just to ask for excuses because I'm not a biologist. I'm a quantum chemist like Angela Merkel. I think not too many similarities, but that was one. And the other is that, in fact, I've been teaching biology sometimes, but my main subject is engineering. Anyway, I've been working with a lot of interdisciplinary projects. That's one of the things I suppose I'm here for. And the second is I'm currently working in a coordination in a program where we make a link, where we organize partnerships between research centers, some of them evolutionary research centers, and primary and secondary schools. And I think that's the presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Ute, for many of you just saw Ute's great presentation, but perhaps you can also just, for those who might not have been here, introduce.
Okay. Okay, my name is Ute Harms. I'm sitting here in the north of Germany in sunny weather, even though I would have preferred to be in Barcelona, but my personal situation is that I couldn't come. I'm very sorry about that. I'm working at the IPN. It's an institute that is doing empirical research, focusing on quantitative research about science education and mathematics education. And do you still hear me? Because it changed here, my view.
I believe it's okay.
It's okay. Okay. And from a start, I did my PhD in cell biology, and I taught biology for several years in high school, but also at university. And today I have different research foci and learning and teaching evolution along the lifespan is one of my focus, and I just did my keynote about 3 of our projects. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to our discussion now.
Great, thank you very much. Josefa?
So good morning, everyone. Let me thank the organizers. I know how hard you have worked to put this together, so thank you. So I'm an evolutionary biologist by training. My whole career I've worked on genome evolution from different perspectives, but always from a genomic point of view. I'm currently a group leader at the Institute of Evolutionary Biology here in Barcelona. And our research tries to understand how organisms adapt to the environment from a genetic point of view. So we want to understand the genes that are behind these adaptive characters, and also from a mechanistic point of view. So we also want to understand how changes in the genome happen.
Great, thank you. And Kostas?
Thank you. I'm Kostas Kampourakis. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation for this panel and the talk right after that. Officially, I'm a science educator. I work at the University of Geneva. I was a school teacher for 12 years in Greece. And my main research interests are in the teaching of evolution, genetics, and nature of science. I was the editor-in-chief of Science and Education for 5 years. And I've also started 2 science education book series with Springer. But I also have a parallel career as an author and editor. So I think I've written already 11 or 12 books, I don't remember, but only one is in science education, because I'm also interested on conceptual issues in science, and I'm going to mention a few in my talk right after that. And I have managed to bring together many scientists to contribute to a new series published by Cambridge University Press called Understanding Life, about topics in science for which there are many misunderstandings.
Great, thank you. And so, as Kostas mentioned, he'll have a talk right after this. And for those of you who were here, Ute gave a talk just before, and I think there's a great conceptual thread that we might be able to follow about this concept of scientific literacy and the aims of evolution. So we'll begin by going into just some short questions to get some things on the table and get us going. So the first short questions, and again, we'll try to keep 3 to 5 minutes of response approximately. So the first question is about scientific literacy. What is scientific literacy in the evolution space for you? So how should we define or think about scientific literacy in relation to evolutionary concepts or evolutionary thinking? And how does evolutionary literacy relate to other aims in either formal or informal education? So you can take that in either direction if you, as you like. And we can begin with Kostas.
Thank you. So I think Ute nicely set the stage with the reference to Douglas Roberts and the distinction between science literacy and scientific literacy. This is a distinction that they later make with Roger Bybee in their chapter, which corresponds to Vision 1 and 2. And I would actually take this distinction further, and I think, and that's the topic of my presentation, we need to define clearly evolutionary literacy, which corresponds to Vision 1, and science literacy, and evolutionary literacy, which corresponds to Vision 2. In short, these are literacy in evolution and about evolution, which means what we need to know and what we can do with this knowledge. And my experience as a teacher and a teacher educator for the past 20 years has been that we usually focus on the former. We don't teach at all about literacy, both because systems are focused on exams and assessments and textbooks and things like that, but also because evolution is a very, very controversial and counterintuitive topic, which requires special preparation on behalf of the teachers. So, unfortunately, I would go as far as say that it's quite difficult to teach about evolutionary literacy because the demands go beyond the scientific content per se, and I will elaborate in an hour or so.
Great, thank you. And we'll go through this round of questions, and then if there's questions from the audiences. So, Yosef?
Yeah, so my perspective as a scientist, when I think about what scientific literacy is, so for me it's like two different things. On one hand is the process, and on the other hand is the content, right? Or this is how I think about it. So I think it's very important to communicate, or that people understand what is the process behind science. So for very basic things, no, that science is based on observations, on facts. It's not based on beliefs. That science is a curiosity-driven process most of the time. I mean, we scientists, like, we pick a question that motivates us. And of course, we specialize more and more when we go up, like, in the knowledge ladder, but we never lose the curiosity. And this is what drives us to do science. And yeah, and a third thing, also very basic, no? I mean, science is about hypothesis testing. So I think these concepts, to me, it would be very interesting to try to convey them to the general public. And then there is content that it's also interesting, but I would say, in my opinion, it's like it's a second level of importance. I think it's more important that society understand the process of scientific knowledge. And regarding the content, I think it would be interesting to communicate that knowledge accumulates and that often it leads to changing perspectives on things. So it's not something, I mean, we build on previous knowledge, but at the same time we are creating knowledge and revising previous knowledge, which is very, very different from other processes that are not scientific, that are not based on facts.
Great, thank you. So now we'll go to Ute.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a very, very broad topic, and I think we can fill the next 2 hours without just with talking about this. I would like to stick to both the lady who talked. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, and Costas. I think from a science educator's perspective, perhaps we look at science evolution or evolutionary literacy a little bit different than a scientist, an evolutionary scientist who is doing pure evolutionary research. But I also agree that the process is very, very important as a part of an element of evolutionary literacy. But in my view, we have to broaden our perspective when we are talking about evolution or evolutionary. And I'm thinking that I'm more on the side of the evolutionary literacy if I stick to Costas' definitions. Because when we are talking about literacy, we can not only look at the topic, at the discipline, at the context, not only at evolution as a scientific field, but we have also to take into consideration the person who is developing the scientific literacy. And therefore, for me, besides knowledge about the process of science and the knowledge about evolutionary principles, scientific literacy also comprises being motivated to use the evolutionary theory for explaining the world, and also the volition to think about evolution and its meaning for my personal life and also for society and for the global community. I think this is very close to the pandemic problem. This could be linked to this. So it's not just evolution as the topic and the principles, the key concepts, but also developing an attitude towards using evolution concepts for explaining the world to myself and to give me an instrument for decision making. Like right now, shall I have a vaccination or shall I not? Shall I have it not? We have the same with climate literacy. This is another field where we are also struggling. What do we mean by this? And people from psychology in Germany, at least, they frown because they say, but scientific literacy is it? And we say we have to differentiate this. But I think it's not only the content, it's also motivation, volition, attitudes, acceptance. For me, this is also a component of scientific literacy on evolution.
Great, thank you. Sylvia? Oh, did you want to add something?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that's it. Yeah. Great. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay, in my point of view is a bit different because somehow I have more general. We have had a lot of discussions about this thing of what should and shouldn't be taught and which paper has to have different fields in compulsory education in primary and secondary school, okay? I'll tell you the conclusion and then I will shortly explain you the why, and I suppose we can develop later. Somehow I've checked if evolution was not very present in primary and secondary education, and the answer is you are not so present. In fact, you are not explicitly present in primary education, at least here. And you are in secondary education, but in short parts, and the great part of them are optional parts, not compulsory parts for everybody, okay? So my way to look at that is it that presence enough? And my answer is, probably is it enough, even if I understand here, everybody would agree it would be better if it was great. But we've got a problem with curriculum. Everybody says things should be added to the curriculum, and no one takes things out, and not everybody can fit in. But the second thing I've got the impression is it could be, the presence you've got in the curriculum could be much better used, okay? Because in fact you've got, and I'll tell you why. You are theoretically one of the big parts of science. When I look as a teacher at the 10 big ideas of science, you've got one for evolution. I mean, you're one of the 10 big ideas of science, poca broma. But that doesn't fit with the amount of, with the importance you've got. It looks as if you've got less importance in the curriculum than the one you're supposed to have as one of the main ideas of biology, okay? But you are a really good, you as evolution is a really great context to use with other disciplines because you interact a lot of with human, with social sciences, okay? You have some part that touch there. You have a great interaction and you have explained it with mathematics, with randomness, with probability, and with all this part. You've got a lot of things that you can interact with, and that makes you a really good context that can be introduced even when it's not explicitly put in the curriculum. And the third part, related to scientists who work in evolution, we need in primary and secondary education role models of people that is working currently, and as a field, evolution is one of the fields that's evolving. I mean, from physicists, we have some embodied, because you have made big changes in the last second half of 20th century, and physics have his big explosion longer time ago in the first part. So there's a lot of people working on physics, of course, and on chemistry, but we don't have very important figures. We don't have very important things we are learning now on physics and on chemistry, and you've got really important things we are learning in evolution, and I think that's something you can it has to be put in value. I don't know how to say it.
Great, thank you. So I heard a number of great ideas in here. I heard that that there's different ways to kind of parse out what is scientific literacy. That we can think about this in different ways. That it's going to have multiple elements or domains. So thinking about the pedagogy, thinking about what's happening in science as it's practiced, thinking about perhaps the whole student. The students' motivations, and then of course the relationship to all of these other disciplines, which is I think a major theme for the conference. So I thank you for these views. Are there? Does anyone have questions? Yeah, I see a question. Is that Chana? I think in the back, or I might be. It's hard to see.
Dustin?
Yes.
May I ask something linked to what what was just said? Because
yes.
There was this sentence. It's evolution is a good context, if I understood this correctly, and I'm asking myself, is evolution a context? For me, it's not a context. For me, it's an explanatory framework, more or less, for everything we are, more or less, everything we are talking about in biology. But I didn't want to disturb your rate.
No, it's great.
But it was just because this is, for me, really something that hits me. So is evolution a context?
Well,
Kostas.
I don't know if Kostas wants, if you want to answer.
No, sorry. No, sorry, I'm not the moderator.
For allusions, okay? Okay, we can discuss if context is the right way. What I mean by context, I mean, for example, in primary education, even if you are not explicitly in the curriculum, even if in the curriculum doesn't say you have to teach evolution, you can use evolution. I know evolution is not just a context, but you can use evolutionary problems or evolutionary questions. You have said something that I think really interesting. Well, wait a moment. You can use these kind of questions or, sets to work, for example, with the general way science works. I think that's crucial. You said this idea of teaching curiosity. Teaching science as a way to look at the world, not the only one way, because there are many others and students should know all them, but as a way to look at the world that's valid for a lot of things, dealing with curiosity, dealing with respecting reality in the sense that if data says something and you don't like what data said, sorry for you, but data said what they say. These things that if you're a really important man and you said something, I'm not so important, but data agree with me, sorry for your importance, but these kind of things, they're really important, I think, to teach to students. And evolution is a good, well, not context, it's even a good field. You can introduce them there to use that. In that sense, I was saying. Even with their dangers, because you've got a story, I mean, eugenesis and social Darwinism is a part of what something same. You've got the controversial part, it's not as easy. There are some subjects that are more like blunt, that you will have no problems in them. If I introduce mechanics, Newtonian mechanics, nobody's going to discuss me. You are polemic, and that has we'll talk in the next question, but that has their advantages.
So would it be safe to say then that evolutionary theory is a explanatory framework, but all of the practices and all of the cultural aspects of the scientific use of this framework, this is a context in your view for education?
Yes, in that sense.
Okay. And does that get at a little bit at your question? Okay. And Chana in the back?
Yes, so first, thank you very much for this great roundtable and for putting together people from such different fields which have these very different perspectives which are really complementary and really important. And So I had a couple of questions. I'm not sure if I'm going to pose all those, so stop me when you feel you should stop. The first thing that triggered my attention was Costa's differentiation between evolution literacy and evolutionary literacy. That was really important to, well, so we never use that, and thank you for bringing it to us. We usually use evolution literacy when many times we are talking about evolutionary literacy according to your definition. And I was surprised by what you said of being more difficult to teach evolutionary literacy than evolution literacy because of the, for example, acceptance problems. But I would argue, and okay, no scientific basis here, or some probably, that when people are learning in the context of, for example, a social problem that is important to them, that can break out some barriers in terms of acceptance, because that particular problem is important to them. They are motivated, like Yut was saying, to learn more about this because they actually want to solve it. And we can be talking about climate change, or we can be talking about very local things that I cannot even at the moment think of. But I would argue that possibly, and again, not sure which is my scientific basis to argue for that, so correct me if you have a scientific basis to correct me, but I would argue that that would build on students' motivation to learn and probably would help with acceptance problems. And the other thing that I would like to point out is, thank you, Sylvia, for highlighting how, so something that is, everybody is saying and complaining, and it's true. I don't know about other countries, but in Portugal, we only put things on the curricula and never take out. And this leads to the 10 miles long, 2-inch depth curricula. So in the end, people doesn't actually learn about nothing. And this is really important to highlight. And also what you said, that we can profit from things that are already there. The question is, how can we do this? So taking advantage from the contents that are already there and include the evolutionary framework or perspective, or as you prefer to call it, to teach also about the evolution key contents. I think that's a question that we also need to find out how to solve, I would argue.
So is the question, how can we, what's the role of kind of conceptual depth?
Two questions. So,
okay.
So shouldn't the contexts build on students' motivation to learn and probably help with acceptance problems, for example? And the other is, how can we take profit from what's already there? Because what's already there, it's many times it has actually been there for many times, and it didn't build on students' evolutionary literacy. So how can we profit from the contents there to build on students' evolutionary literacy?
First question was for you? Yep. Okay, so I will refrain from saying anything about evolution and evolutionary literacy because I don't want to give superficial answers, and I have a detailed presentation for this. But for the other questions, I think the answer is one, and it's the same answer to all questions. Teacher education. There is research that shows that teachers have serious misunderstandings of everything, and the people to blame, I'm sorry to say that, are the science departments. The way science is taught, the reason that scientists are not motivated to communicate, to be involved in science communication because they have to apply for grants and publish papers. And they come to us, the teachers with whom I work have masters in science, some of them have PhDs in science, some come to schools after doing a short career in research. But when it comes to the key concept that Ute mentioned, pedagogical content knowledge, we have serious problems. And then we don't have sufficient time to prepare them to deal with how to teach the content knowledge that they know in an appropriate manner so that they address students' concerns and misunderstandings. An important issue is that there are two kinds of obstacles when it comes to evolutionary theory. There are conceptual obstacles, but there are also emotional obstacles. And they have to do with worldviews. I will mention racism and religiosity in my presentation. And these are two things that a biology teacher would have to address, but it's not simple and straightforward how this can be done. So all in all, I would say that what we need to pay attention to is how teachers are prepared, and not only before they go to schools, but also during their career, to deal with these issues, especially as biology is changing. I mean, I was a student 25 years ago, and most of what I learned then doesn't stand anymore. Things have changed enormously.
Great, thank you. So I think that sets us up actually to go into the second short question. Oh, Ute, yes, sorry. Yes, Ute.
Dustin, if I may, I don't want, you are the leader here.
No problem. We have plenty of time.
So I think what Jana was addressing is very interesting, but I think it's not so focused on evolution only. As Costa said, we have empirical validated knowledge from educational sciences that show that if you teach, it's in particular reasonable to link to the pre-knowledge, to link to the preconceptions. And this, of course, counts for evolution, and this is what I showed in my presentation. All these studies about preconceptions, about evolution, there is so much knowledge, and I think that it would be necessary that university in higher education, the colleagues that are teaching the disciplines should also sometimes read a little bit about that, so that they are more successful perhaps in teaching the evolutionary concepts. And another point that is relevant in this context is to link to the everyday understandings as well, because some people, they have the disciplinary concept in their mind, but parallelly they have an everyday understanding, and this is conflicting these different conceptions. Therefore, it's necessary also to stick to or to link to the everyday understandings. And the question how we can help the students or support the students to apply the knowledge. And I think this is also something that is relevant for the evolutionary literacy. We know from research that it's helping that you combine knowledge and learning of knowledge and learning of particular practices. So not only to try to develop factual and conceptual knowledge solidly, but also combine it with activities, and this in science lessons, it's scientific practices like doing an experiment, order different species to different categories. So really always combine practices with knowledge. Then it's more successful to not to end up with lazy knowledge or inactive knowledge in the brain, but knowledge that can be used later. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. So it seems that some of these challenges are going to be challenges that are facing the education system as a whole, and then we've also got a set of challenges that might be more specific to the conceptualization of evolutionary theory. And I think that sets us up to go to this next round of questions. Maybe here we'll start with Sylvia and go down this way. The second round of short questions, what areas do you see as the greatest opportunities or challenges for teaching evolution? And how should different actors or different sectors in evolution education, formal or informal, support each other with the aim of scientific literacy?
Okay. And some of the things I'm going to say, I think, are related to the second question you did, Shanna. I think you've got three great advantages, three great opportunities in evolution. Well, the first one I've already told. You're an important part of biology that is currently developing, so that's one big point. The second one is, I don't know, you're sexy as a discipline, you're attractive. There are disciplines that I don't know why, when you talk children about them, they get excited, and there are disciplines that are boring. And I came from physics field, and I don't know, thermodynamics is not especially attractive. I don't know why, because I like it, but people, let's make thermodynamics, nobody says, bleh. You say, let's make astronomy, and they get crazy. They begin to ask questions and questions and questions, and everybody's interested in black holes and things like that. And something similar happens with evolution, maybe in his more, what we were saying before, maybe in its more difficult parts that are human evolution, but they're interested in that field. So that's one big advantage I think you can use. And the last one I've already told, you are really good, you have relationships with them. You are significant for children. Theoretically scientists said relevant contexts for children are those that are close to them. I never finished to understand this, because following this, this rule, children should be crazy about, I don't know, altered current that they've got all around them, and they don't get crazy about altered current, I can tell you. But they get crazy about dinosaurs. They haven't got real dinosaurs in their room, so there's something missing there. But anyway, you are significant in healthy issues, which lately are important, and you are significant too in all this field of animals that's really attractive for them. So you are significant. You have links to social problems and to history and to these things about having problems with religion is a problem, but it means too you can use evolution to deal with this problem. You have to talk with children. What happens when you believe one thing and religion says, and science says another one? And what we have already said, it's good to see how science works in general. There are other fields that are good for that, but you have this advantage. Regarding to this advantage, very short. First, you have a crazy amount of misconceptions related to your field. Every field has, but yours, I've looked for misconceptions, and I found a list from Berkeley of 30, I can deal with 3 or 4, but 30 misconceptions, really? Yeah, 30 misconceptions that are really located. Second, that general in science, the culture of teachers about science is not very good, especially when dealing with primary teachers. Some of them are really genial about it, but in general, not all of them. A lot of them come from human studies. And people who study humanity doesn't study science. We scientific don't study too much humanity, but humanists don't study science at all, which is a problem. And even with secondary teachers that don't belong to our field, okay, that are from other fields. And the third disadvantage, that may be an advantage, is what I already told you. You are controversial, which means, in general, teachers, if possible, tends to avoid the subject if they're not especially interested. As a teacher, you're not especially interested many times in problems that can produce a father coming to complain to the headmaster saying, this teacher is teaching something that I don't want my son or daughter to be taught. Okay?
Great, thank you. I guess we'll go to Ute in the middle, if that's okay.
Yes. I don't feel so good, because when I look on my monitor, on my screen, I see me very huge, like God sitting above you, and I don't like that.
That's how you look here too.
Can you make me smaller, please? Okay. So I do have 2 challenges and 2 advantages. Let me start with the challenges. I think one huge challenge for evolution, for supporting the development of evolutionary literacy is the high complexity of evolution. In my view, if you have understood evolution, you have understood biology. Because if you have understood the mechanisms, the principles, the key concepts of evolution, you should be able to explain all phenomena linked to biological systems. This is the first challenge, so the high complexity. And the second challenge is that human beings have developed different kinds to look at the world and to explain the world to themselves. Like the Aborigines have other ways to explain their surroundings, the nature, than a scientist in New York does. So, in the students learn many ways. In Germany we say the Modi der Weltbetrachtung. So there are different modi that we look, lenses, how we look at the world. Religion, for example, is another lens than science. And when you are in the classroom, no matter which level, primary, secondary, or even later at university, in higher education, you find all these other lenses as well. And the teacher has to cope with these and has to have arguments for his or her evolutionary worldview. These are the 2 challenges. And advantages, for me, evolution is the framework for evolution teaching. And this helps a lot. If I succeed in my teaching biology to make my students understand the basic principles of evolution, I think then the whole fields of biology to learn are going to be smoother and easier. And the second advantage, but this can also be perhaps a disadvantage, but I see it more as an advantage for teaching. This is the fact that when we are talking about evolution, we talk.
I think we just lost you for a moment.
About the students themselves, because when we are talking, am I back?
You're back. Now you're back.
Hi?
You're back.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
The second advantage is, I start anew the second advantage, because I don't know what you heard. The second advantage, in my view, is that when we are talking about evolution, we have the chance to talk about the students themselves as human beings, and human beings as a product of evolution in one sense, and in another sense as a factor that is changing the biological world. I fear that you lost me again.
No, it's okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
Great, thank you. That was very interesting. And so now we'll go to Josefa.
Opportunities. I think it's so related to evolution or an evolutionary knowledge. It's so important, or it's the basis for so many societal issues that we are dealing with right now. No? So it might not be that difficult to find people that it's worried about biodiversity loss or the loss of particular species. And that's a huge opportunity, to teach them or to transfer knowledge on how biodiversity, I don't want to use the word created, but how biodiversity is generated, no? to explain them that all of us come from a single common ancestor. Adaptation to global change, resistance to pesticides and to drugs related to cancer. I mean, like, understanding evolution, it gives you tools to understand these other problems that are problems that we are facing right now. For example, we have an interactive workshop in which we try to use, or we use evolutionary knowledge as a tool against racism. So just by teaching not teaching, but sharing the knowledge that we have as scientists on the origin of human populations, so just presenting people with the facts, so what we know and how do we know this, how did we arrive to these conclusions about the origin of human populations, and that's super powerful, and people feel empowered against racism because they see this problem from a completely different perspective. And I want to acknowledge that the idea for this workshop was of Roberto Torres, one of the organizers. And then, so a lot of opportunities, because it's very related to our daily lives. Challenges. So one of the challenges to me is how to reach people with very different backgrounds, no? And with very different levels of knowledge about science and about evolution. And another challenge that I see is that, yes, teachers, I think it's a challenge because it's very important. I think evolution should be taught at the schools from very early levels, if you ask me. But then we have a challenge, is that we need to have teachers that really understand evolution so that they can communicate this knowledge to the students.
Great, thank you. So we'll go to Kostas.
Yeah. So I don't have much to add because all these ideas are great. So I'll try to contribute to a more general thinking about challenges, opportunities, advantages of this. First of all, does anyone in chemistry ask why we have to teach the periodic table? Many people may hate it, but there's no question about why we can teach this, because it's something fundamental. And I think the same is the case for evolutionary theory. I will answer the question by go on the opposite side with an anecdote that might be interesting. So there's a lot of discussion, you mentioned earlier the curriculum, about whether evolution is included in the curriculum or in schools or not. Well, I would say it doesn't have to be, because if teachers are well prepared to talk about evolution, they can do it everywhere. Whenever they teach about form and function in physiology, whenever they talk about ecosystems, or I mean, whatever you want, they should be able to mention how and why we have what we have. But the problem is to do this effectively, and here is the anecdote. So I was a school teacher in Greece, and I started my PhD in evolution education in part because it wasn't taught much or at all, and I wanted to address the issue. So I was in a private school, very fortunate to have a lot of resources to use, and on the first year, I reversed the curriculum. I bring evolution right from the start, at the start of the course, 14 to 15-year-old students, and I gave them a good booster shot of evolutionary concepts and thinking and everything, and then switched to the rest of biology. The results were horrible. And when I read the answers, I realized that there is a reason that evolution is in the end. Students need to understand a lot more before that. They need to understand how ecosystems work. They need to understand heredity. They need to understand the structure and function of organisms. So in the end, I put evolution back in the end, and I tried to structure a curriculum in order to arrive at an understanding of how to explain nature in evolutionary terms. So all I'm saying is that we have opportunities to teach about evolution, in my view, in every course. There's no need for a chapter or a session on evolution. We can talk about it everywhere. The problem are the challenges, and the challenges are broader than we are. And this is why I said that the answer is teacher education. Attention, I didn't say teacher training, because education is different than training. And we need to educate teachers to be more thoughtful than what they usually are about these issues. And let me give you an example. Which are the main topics, scientific topics today about which there is resistance? Climate change, vaccination, human evolution. What is the common underlying thread? The problem of uncertainty. What people do not understand and cannot deal with is the uncertainty that is inherent in science, which, as we argue in a book, it actually makes science advance because it's this uncertainty that keeps scientists asking questions and opening doors that have 10 more doors behind, and so on and so on. And interestingly, the reports of the IPCC show for climate change that uncertainties become more and more and more because we understand better and better the phenomena. But how can we communicate this to people, to students? That's the hard part. And the answer, that's a quote I mentioned yesterday, and I like to mention it, comes from Georgi Gerenger, a psychologist in Germany, who said that a big problem is that we teach students the mathematics of certainty, Euclidean geometry, and not the mathematics of uncertainty, which is statistics. So I think that we have broader issues to address in education about scientific literacy more broadly, about an understanding of how science works, what we say in science education, the nature of science, which would affect evolution, education, and understanding enormously.
Great, thank you. So, So a lot of challenges and opportunities. It's impossible for me to summarize everything, but some of the things I heard here about opportunities, at least, are this incredible conceptual structure, the conceptual framework of evolution that makes it such a, I think Ute was saying, such a powerful direction for teaching. And then many panel members mentioned, of course, the relevance for understanding our everyday experience, or for understanding what it means to be human, or for understanding some of those global pressing issues from racism to perhaps other issues. And then, of course, on the challenges, what I'm hearing is almost a kind of mirror image of that, right? That Sylvia mentioned the challenge of interdisciplinarity, which will be where we go next to some degree, that perhaps evolution is not well integrated with the humanities, and perhaps humanities does not always know how to deal with sciences. And then, of course, I think many of you mentioned the systemic theme throughout the conference, I guess, has been these systemic challenges. So systemic challenges to teacher education, or systemic challenges to how the curriculum is even designed. Do we have any questions or comments? Does anyone want to build on any ideas here? Ute? Yeah. Ute, you can go.
Yeah. I would like to play a little bit Advocatus Diaboli according to what Costa said. And this is the point or the aspect of uncertainty. Of course, regarding science as a continuous process to get findings about the natural world and ourselves, then at a particular point of time, our knowledge is imperfect. But in educational contexts, especially starting with very young children, in my view, it's a danger to stress at the first place the uncertainty aspect. Because uncertainty, and I have this discussion with my postdocs and doctoral students and my master students, in German language, uncertainty is often translated into Unsicherheit, insecurity. And in my view, this is totally wrong. this connotation, because the science knowledge that we have at a particular point of time is the best knowledge, in my view, that we can have. And in my view, the pandemic and the possibilities that the vaccination is giving to us is a very, very good example to show that. So in my view, of course, knowledge that science is offering to us and that science is elaborating is never perfect, and it's always getting further by our new findings. But if we go back historically at the beginning of science, the reason why people started to do these things to find out something about their surrounding and about the world led to science. And this was and is still a very, very valuable thing that humans have developed. And in my view, this should be stressed at the beginning. And in fact, we have facts that will not change. That the human germ cell has 23 chromosomes. I doubt that on the long run, someone will show that it's wrong. We are going more and more into details. Our findings are becoming more exact and more exact because of new techniques. But saying that all our scientific knowledge, I'm exaggerating, I know, is uncertain, is, in my view, bringing the learner into the wrong direction and even will drive skepticism against science. Ready, I'm ready.
Great, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that our views on nature of science itself may be a strong informer of how we think about teaching evolution. Is that fair?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I guess just a quick check if that sounds like a fair summary.
Yeah. This is, of course, this is touching the problem of the nature of science.
Yeah. And so we have a question from the audience. Johannes?
Yes, thank you. So this is extremely interesting for me because I am an evolutionary researcher and I come at, education of evolution very naively. One underlying issue that I see here is evolution requires process thinking, right? And so fundamentally one problem that humanity has, and that's known, we're very early on in our lives biased against thinking about process and explanations in terms of processes. And so maybe I was very fascinated by Costa's sort of distinction between evolution and evolutionary knowledge. But there's also a distinction between a very broad kind of what I would call evolutionary thinking in general about problems that are very general in terms of adaptive processes, which seems to be very hard for a lot of people, but goes way beyond evolutionary processes in biology specifically, right? And so I was just wondering what the panel was thinking is, in terms of this as a challenge of teaching children to think very, very fundamentally differently about problems in the sense of process thinking instead of, thing thinking.
So, Kostas, yeah, you can.
It's a huge discussion we cannot have right now. But I think the answer is in part in what Ute mentioned. So, of course, Ute is right that we wouldn't go to the first grade and tell them, look, science is uncertain. We wouldn't do that. And this is where intelligent design is useful in the sense of intelligent curriculum design. Curriculum design is very difficult, but I think we can adjust it so that we begin to make students have confidence in science, because as Ute said, is the most solid, rational kind of knowledge that we can have, but also show them that things are not always crystal clear. And one reason for the reactions against the pandemic measures, for instance, were that people are not used to dealing with uncertainty. But if you go back to history in 1918 in the United States with the flu, the so-called Spanish flu, which is a wrong name, as you know, and that's just a weird reason that they call it Spanish, what they found in analysis from data since then is that the cities that took strict measures had less mortality than others. So there were things that we already knew. The question was how to communicate them to people in order to make them understand that this happens. Now, there are fundamental things that we can do. I have a suggestion that I've been making for 10 years, but nobody's listening in part correctly because I don't have any empirical data yet to show. We go to kindergarten and we tell kids about the distinction between living and non-living entities, which is, in my view, the second step. The first step would be to show them the distinction between organisms and artifacts, or actually natural objects and artifacts, which is the distinction between what is designed and what is natural. And once we separated artifacts from the rest, then there we can make the distinction between living and non-living, putting organisms in one place and rocks and clouds and everything in the other. Why? Because there's evidence in psychology that perhaps because we grow up from a very young age surrounded by artifacts, we learn that everything around us exists for a purpose. Just think when you were infants, how many natural objects were around you and how many artifacts were around you. Now, the idea is, and this is of course a hypothesis that I'm not sure the psychologists have a conclusion to that, is that as most of what we see around is an artifact designed for a purpose, with essences, essential features and goals, eventually we extrapolate that to nature. And that's a main obstacle that we could address. Ute mentioned the work of Deborah Kellerman. That's her argument, and I think it's in the right direction. So there are fundamental things that we can do from early on, and I entirely agree with Ute. She made the point earlier, the secondary school is too late. We have to start from kindergarten with fundamental distinctions that address fundamental problems like the one I just mentioned.
I just link it with what you were saying. I just wanted to point out things. First, you've said one thing that I think is really interesting. That's when dealing with teaching with children, we have to be, with teaching to children, or with children, but we have to have clear that there are things that can be taught at some levels. You cannot be talking about evolution as a long-term period to young children because for them, millions of years means nothing, absolutely nothing. It's impossible to talk about human evolution with really young children. They don't get that time problem. That it was something Ute said in his previous conference. And the other thing you said, Ute, that I think I'm pointing at the screen, not at you, is this question with probability, with uncertainty. You've got, evolution has a curious mixture between rules and randomness and uncertainty processes, okay? And that's hard to understand even for adults, and imagine for children. But I think there is one thing that we can use here. There is one environment in which children really deal well with this mixture, that are games. To teach evolution to children, I think games are good because games have just good-made games. Be careful, not every game is. But games have just this mixture of randomness together with the rules. And I think that's a good context, because if you try to go before time with things that are not prepared for them, that they are not prepared to learn, then you get misconception, you get weird things. There is a curriculum, I don't know if you know it, there is a proposed science curriculum in Victoria State, that's in Australia, but it's really good, where they make a gradation in different fields of which ideas you should touch first. They're great. I've downloaded the ideas for biology and I've looked at your field in that sense. And the ideas you should touch with children, it was the one you were telling. There are things that are artificial, animals are different, animals came from parents, they're quite similar to these basic ideas, they have to be first there before you go further. And I think You can check that. And the last thing, talking about uncertainty, I think it's not a question. I think that's a question that's difficult for everybody. I don't know if you know the book from Kahneman. Kahneman said that the Israeli, he's a psychologist. He said every human is a genius in linguistic, but every human is an absolute disaster in statistical, just for the way we're wired. Statistical concepts, randomness, is hard for everybody, not just for children. We hate thinking in processes that don't have a reason, that is just randomness. Would you get COVID? Who knows? We hate that impression of not having nothing to do that, you know, that we can influence. Are you going to win this or that? Who knows? It's random. That's something we dislike deeply. And, well, we have to be conscious as teachers of that. It's normal to have religion, don't have that. Religion, what you get is because you've win it, or because God knows it. You don't know it, but God knows it, you know? And that's not, that's a weird thing. Science, on the way, is not a natural way to think. You have to be conscious about that. Every culture has technology. Every culture has religion. Not every culture has science, the way we understand. In fact, I think we are almost the only one. And that doesn't mean science is not valid. Science is great, but it means it is not so easy to teach because it's not so natural. These things of the knowledge is the strongest knowledge we have, but we have the doubt as a method. Doubt as a method, doubting everything, which gives us safety. It's like, that's not easy. That's why, I mean, it's normal to have that difficulty.
Just a minor point, whereas Kahneman has shown with Amos Tversky that there are difficulties, Georgi Uranger has also analyzed their work and shown that it's not only the difficulties that we have, perhaps it's not mostly any hard wiring that precludes us from understanding what is going on, it's also the way we frame the questions. And sometimes we do not make things easy for people to understand what we're asking. And we confuse them with percentages, whereas we can present things differently and make things clearer.
Great. So I think this also sets us up for the perhaps last set of questions. So Johannes was bringing up this concept of adaptation, both in the biological and perhaps human domain. And Sylvia was thinking about this uncomfortability. The experience of students is to be an agent in the world. And perhaps to be adapting, trying to adapt and create an adaptive environment. And we've been talking a lot today and these past 2 days about the meaning of evolution as it relates to being human. And I think one of the themes that's become clear in some of these sessions and in some of our discussions is that there's a huge amount of diversity even among this expert group, right? We have this amazing interdisciplinary expertise. And so what we wanted to try to get at in a more open discussion fashion is in the human domain, when we think about evolution and relating it to human issues, we have this diversity of opinion. As Sylvia said, perhaps the humanities are not well integrated with science in some sense. As Susie and I discussed last night, there's of course the evolutionary human sciences, which do that. And of course, in evolution education, we're not always connecting these dots. And so I thought we could maybe have a more open discussion about what does it mean, from your view, could you describe your views on the role and relationship of education in evolutionary biology as it relates to these other disciplinary works, especially in the human sciences or the humanities? And how could formal or informal educators work together in this regard to support the aims of scientific literacy? So how do we take our evolutionary view of the world and relate it either to what it means to be human or human issues, human sciences, or the humanities? And this is open. Does anyone volunteer? Costas?
That's a very important and a very important question and an issue that has caused problems all over. I think that science and scientists need a broader understanding beyond science. anthropologists have been blaming evolutionary geneticists and population geneticists for implicitly and unconsciously supporting racism with their work, exactly because they do not perhaps realize that when we deal with humans, we need a broader understanding of what is going on. So actually, racism was supported by science at the end of 19th century. Then we had eugenics and the Holocaust, and you know the stories. Nothing to do with Darwin. It has to do with ideas that were spread all over Europe and North America. But even that, after that, and even after UNESCO provided definitions of race and everything, there were biologists like Dobzhansky who were against any kind of discrimination, but still believed that races are real, that they exist. And then later we had Luigi Luca Cavalli-Sforza and his project, the various projects he was involved to trace human genetic variation, which were based on assumptions that archaeologists, anthropologists, and many others would criticize. They went to supposedly pure isolated populations and tried to trace the genetic variation that they have in order to make comparisons with more admixed ones. So I would qualify, perhaps I'm Greek, my parents are Greek, my grandparents are Greek, everyone was in Greece as far as I know, but I only know for 2 or 3 generations what was going on, not before that, but they didn't care. Insofar as you have been there for 2 generations, that's enough. As if genetic inheritance goes undiluted on and on across generations, but this is not at all what happens. Furthermore, another assumption that Cavalli-Sforza made was that globalization and migration began with Columbus. He was very important, and the pace of migration was much more increased during the colonization era, but this doesn't mean that people were not migrating before. So all I'm saying is that eventually we had the HapMap project, the Human Genome Diversity Project, and other projects mapping human genetic variation on particular assumptions that do not stand from archaeological and anthropological points of view. And in this sense, unconsciously, scientists, geneticists have created the impression that we can support racial differences on the basis of biology. This is what people like Nicholas Wade and Charles Murray have done with their books, whereas this is not the case, much as the same geneticists claim in their articles that what we have found does not support any notion of race. So my point is that science is important, but when it comes to humans, we have to look at the broader issue. We don't care about Drosophila, perhaps, and if the race is there, but we care about one another. And what we know is that we are a huge family that has evolved for 4 seconds in a 24-hour period. And this is something that we can transmit to students, I think.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go a little bit against you. Not against you, but I mean, what you said it's true. But I think this, okay, how can I say this? I'm being politically correct.
Just to be clear, I'm not blaming the geneticists for being racist.
I know.
But there were people who took advantage of this work, which was misunderstood, because they didn't think of the broader questions.
Okay.
Or because they made assumptions that do not stand from other points of view.
No, I was going to say that I think that I haven't done any study, but I think that the majority of the population biologists or population geneticists don't believe, and they defend that there is no genetic basis for races. So the fact that some people, do, or even they were misinterpreted and used as an excuse to foster the idea that, there are differences, genetic-based differences between human populations, I think it doesn't reflect, like the community knowledge. So I was going to compare it to global change. So global change, I think, I don't know the percentage, but a very, very high percentage of scientists think that we have enough data to conclude that we are in front of a global change that is caused by humans. Of course, you are always going to have small percentage of scientists that are going to go against this, but like the community as a whole, it's in favor. So I agree with you now what you are saying, no? That then some parts of society or even journalists are going to give voice to this small percentage of scientists that are like going contrary to what the whole community is thinking, and this can be misinterpreted, right? And used even to go against views that are clearly established in science.
Well, here's an interesting story. There's a study by Anne Morning with biologists and anthropologists back in 2008, whether they believe that race is biological or not. And I assume she was expecting that biologists would say yes and anthropologists would say no, but the funny thing was that half of them said yes and half of them said both biologists and anthropologists. She was thinking that perhaps it's the discipline that makes a difference, but eventually it's not. Now, I don't know of any large-scale studies. That was a study with 40 scientists in the United States, if I remember correctly. But the whole thing is that it's not about disciplines, but eventually the point stands that we need a broader discussion, a broader collaboration. And actually, there are now centers of what they call paleogenetics, at least in Germany. I can think of one where archaeologists and anthropologists and geneticists work together to bring new ideas, bring forth new ideas. And I think this is what we need: interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and multidisciplinary collaborations, not just isolated studies that ignore one kind of scholarship over the other.
I completely agree, yeah.
Could you just comment further? So you mentioned Cavalli Sforza, who developed this critical work on race as not a biological construct, and then of course part of his work has led to the now robust field of cultural evolution science, which is also has scholarship around potentially the cultural evolution of racism or anti-racism. And so that's been a bit of a discussion here. When we think about evolution education and interdisciplinary evolution education, how are we reading out that history? Should we, in your view, is that gene-focused thread the way to go, or do you also see value in Cavalli Sforza's other work?
I don't know. That's a hard question, but I would say that there are a number of books that make these arguments. Jonathan Marks has written the book Is Science Racist? A journalist, Angela Saini, has written the book Superior. I think is one for race or inferior. One for sex, one for race. I think Superior is for race, where they make the claims and they show the evidence that science has, again, unconsciously and implicitly supported these ideas because they're not framed in the way they should be framed. Now, here's the big challenge. Can a biology teacher teach evolution and address all these issues? I don't know. That's very hard. And that's actually one of the problems I'm going to describe about evolutionary literacy, that it demands knowledge and understanding that goes beyond the undergraduate studies in biology that the teacher usually has.
No, I related to this last issue and talking about interdisciplinarity. Sorry, I think that's an issue that's in discussion between the community of teachers. If someone wants to make a scientific research, it would be nice to have someone saying something more than an opinion. But there is people that thinks that you have to teach your specialty, you know? To teach evolution, you need a biologist, full stop. That's one extreme of the spectrum. The other extreme of the spectrum is everybody can teach everything. You are teaching children, you're not teaching such a complicated material. So if you're asking for children to understand something that you are not able to teach, we have a problem, you know? you should be able, okay? And there is a lot of people in the middle. There are problems with interdisciplinarity. There is no doubt about that, okay? And no, here, in my opinion, and it's just an opinion, that's a problem. There are too much opinion in this field. in my opinion, I think, especially in secondary education, we are too attached to our field. Obviously, it's the field you prefer. I mean, if you finish up studying biology because you love biology in general, you know, so you love that field, you have a personal relation with the field. But you know, I always say, the day they give you the title, they didn't take out your brain, I hope. So you can learn more things. There's some people that act as if the only period in which you can learn things is that 4 years you are in the university, and once you are out and you're a biologist, sorry, you cannot learn about social science, you know? It is not that way. Anyway, it's hard, it's not easy, you know, because not for learning facts, which are easy to learn if you have a minimum interest, but for having to learn that way to look at the world, which is not so easy to transmit. And in that sense, when talking about interdisciplinarity, we need something from scientists. We have to ask something for you. I think we need a clear, or as clear as possible, explanation about what should and especially what shouldn't be taught. I mean, we make mistakes if we learn on ourselves and on our intuition. But I think you are the one that have the knowledge to say, wait a moment, when you have to explain about evolution, what you cannot say is, I don't know, that competition for the strongest is going to be, that you cannot say because this is not that way, because this, and I can understand, it's not so difficult to understand that concept. I just cannot take out that concept out of all the field of evolutionary, because I don't know all the field. That's something you have to do. And I think that could be helpful. In collaboration, that field I told you, I'm working lately, when you try to make a collaboration between teachers and scientists, the best thing you can bring is that thing that, as a teacher, I have an idea about what to do in my classroom. But when I explain it to you, maybe you say, wait a moment, this thing you're doing is not what you are supposed to be doing. You cannot say it that way, you have to. And that thing, having that help, it would be really useful. Having activities, so I thought, I don't know who I was talking about the other day, that you were saying, we teachers cannot create everything we do in the classroom just because we have no time, okay? Then it's good to have good activities, and there are a huge resource of them. We have seen some of them here. We have seen, there are in our resources, I know in the local field, I know the material that was constructed during the Darwin year, that's really interesting. We have centers for, specialized centers of resources that can give you material, but it's important if that material is constructed between people who has the knowledge, teachers, and then have some freedom for teachers to adapt. And being very specific in that aspect, I'm not, obviously a language teacher, but I've got a good language teacher telling to me, Sylvia, you have to go to a classroom and you have to teach, I don't know, argumentary text, and you have to be careful with this, with this, with this, and with that. And I've been able to do it. And I've got the teacher teaching robotics. I took her and said, come here. You have to be careful with, of course, she needs me at the side, but it is possible. It's possible, but it's difficult, which means you have to be conscious. You are asking for an extra effort to teachers when you ask to be interdisciplinary. Anyway, it's the only one way you can deal with real world and real problems. Because real world is the example you were saying, you cannot talk about racism just as a biological problem. You cannot talk about, well, you can, but you miss a part if you talk about racism just as a social problem, as if science has nothing to say about. We need to collaborate in that. The big problem here, there are two big problems. One, time, and second, mental barriers. We are comfortable with our, in our field with our similar people.
Yeah, we'll just jump. We'll get to Ute, and then we've got a couple audience questions. Yes, Ute.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps I see it a little bit differently than Sylvia. And I would like to take another perspective, and this is the perspective on teacher education. I think there is no doubt, and we have enough data that show that the content knowledge, in our case, the biological knowledge, is absolutely relevant and necessary to be a good biology teacher. And we have the correlation between the content knowledge and the pedagogical content knowledge are very, very high. And pedagogical knowledge is, this content knowledge is a mediator for the development of pedagogical knowledge. So I think that a biology teacher has to have a very profound education in biology, there is no doubt. The question that Dustin was raising in respect to all the different subjects and the interdisciplinarity, in my view, we have to go back a little bit when trying to discuss this into the history. How did these subjects, school subjects, came up? Why were they implemented? Why do we have a school subject about music but not gardening, for example? And this is related to what I tried to explain earlier about the Modi der Weltbegegnung. It's a term implemented by Wilhelm von Humboldt, and it's related to the school subjects, because human beings have different ways to express themselves. And we find this fact in subjects like arts, like literature, like sports. And also we have different epistemologies, and these are reflected by humanities versus or complemented by science. And in my view, each teacher, no matter what subject he or she will teach, should have such a course in the beginning of his or her studies where these kinds of more epistemological aspects that are behind and the foundations of their subjects must be educated to implement an understanding what is the aim of the subjects. And then when teaching, also make relationships to the other subjects, but at the same time make understandable or make visible that each subject has its own right of its existence, because it does something totally different. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I think that really rounds out the continuing theme of this conference in terms of interdisciplinarity, that there's different views of opinion. And I think Sylvia said it nicely that, actually Sylvia and Ute both highlighted that perhaps there's a social emotional competency that we need as scientists about how to think, how to relate to disciplines, some level of maybe intellectual humility or perspective taking when we're talking across disciplines in this evolutionary way. So this is the scheduled time for the end of this session. I think we'll have to. I say we had a few questions, but I think we'll just have to spill out into the hall. And Kostas's talk will be coming up, which will also build on a lot of these themes. So I hope we can continue this discussion. And thank you all for attending.